Good morning, everybody. This is Scott Dudley. I'm Scott Dudley with the Florida League of Mayors. I'm Executive Director. I appreciate you all taking time to be with us here today. Obviously, you all have very busy schedules, and we appreciate you taking time to be with us. We've developed a program today that I'm going to make that I'm sure is going to be worth your time being here today. It's going to be very interesting and some hard conversations and some interesting conversations, and so we're glad that you're here. Today is the first installment of Florida League of Mayor Presidents and Palatka Mayor Terrell Hill's Candid Conversations with Mayors initiative. The idea behind President Hill's initiative is to help build bridges and facilitate dialogue that will help solve problems that require a better understanding of where the other party to the dispute is actually coming from, instead of coming in with preconceived notions, having a better understanding at the outset of where they're trying to get to and where they're coming from. Obviously, the way to do that, to solve problems, the best way is to come together and find out what the two sides have in common, and then begin the conversation. These are often difficult or uncomfortable conversations, but to do so, to have these conversations, is vital to resolving the problem in a way that each side feels that they've been heard and that they were respected throughout the process. I'm going to now turn it over to Scott Payne and Shawanda Barnett, who will be serving as moderators. We're going to have 3 different panels. I want to thank first Lynn Tipton, Director of FLC University, for her work on this, Linda Bridges and Rachel Embleton, who have done a great job of working out all the logistics, lots of practice and learning technology involved in this, and for President Hill for his leadership, and for the Board of the League of Mayors for your support of this initiative. And with that, Scott and Shawanda, take it away.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I think this is going to be a great series of conversations, and I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to listen to it myself. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started with our first segment. We will take questions at the end of each segment. We have 3 conversations set up with pairs of mayors for this morning's program. The way you can get a question heard is to enter your question in the chat box in Zoom. Those questions probably will only be seen by Rachel, who's moderating those questions, and she'll collect a few of them to ask at the end of each segment. So if you'd like to ask a question, please enter your question in the chat box at any time, and we'll try to get to a few of those at the end of each segment. Each of the segments is running more or less of about 40 minutes, including question and answer, which will get us to the end of the program at about noon. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first 2 guests for conversation, Mayor Kevin Ruane from the city of Sanibel, and Mayor Stephen Wilson from the city of Belle Glade. And I'm going to start, if I may, Mayor Wilson, when you and I chatted about this, you talked about the long history of conflict between communities that are on the southern shore of Lake Okeechobee and largely in West Palm Beach County, and cities on the west coast of Florida. Can you kind of set the stage for the conversation we're going to have?
Good morning. Thank you, Scott. Good morning, Mr. President, to the Florida League of Cities and to the Florida League of Mayors. President Hill, let me first start by saying thank you. Thank you all for allowing this much needed candid conversation as it relates to the issues and challenges with the 2nd largest body of freshwater in the United States, referred to as Lake Okeechobee. But more importantly, the need of us working as one, as a team. I made no mistakes or secrets about it, y'all. Lake Okeechobee has its issues and challenges, which has caused a lot of tension on all levels of government, including cities versus cities, and in some cases, y'all, family against families. Now, in my neck of the woods, some of us refer to the most recent Lake Okeechobee issue as the Great Standoff. The standoff of the good, the bad, and the ugly. You see, the good thing about this issue is both Mayor Ruane and myself seem to have learned a great deal the hard way. As he would put it, even without the playbook. You see, we realize the value of the Florida League of Cities and the Florida League of Mayors, which often showcase the importance of fostering good working relationship, even if we don't agree on particular issues. Now, the bad thing is about it, it's never an easy fix when it comes to finding a solution or solutions to satisfy the needs of mankind, especially when we come from different walks of life and when our communities are made up totally different. Now, the ugly thing about this issue is that every so often, y'all, in this political arena, we're faced with the pits of fire and sometimes thrown in the lion's den with the expectation to survive it all without a playbook, without the resources, and in some cases, without the moral support. I will never forget it. It was a rainy, dreary day in Tallahassee. The year was 2017. But guess what? It didn't stop the folks on the mini buses, the cars, and the trucks coming from all over the state to advocate for the right approach on the Lake Okeechobee issue. And there we were, both Mayor Ruan and myself testifying before our state lawmakers with different approaches. While he was trying to convince them on one way, I was trying to convince them on a different approach. The truth of the matter, neither one of us held back our thoughts. We threw out everything but the kitchen sink. Yes, during this discussion, we also hit below the belt. I even heard comments that the easiest way to resolve the Lake Okeechobee issue was to flood the Glades communities. That is, flood Belglade, flood South Bay, flood Pahokee, and flood Clewiston. They don't matter. So you can only imagine how I was feeling at the time. It really got me fired up. So immediately after the hearing, I approached Mayor Ruan, and I approached him in a very aggressive, hostile manner. Now imagine, here he is about 6'5", weighing in at 240 pounds, and I'm about 5'7", weighing in at 160 pounds. I envisioned it as David versus Goliath. The conversation was very intense, y'all. It got to the point we were face to face, finger to finger, toe to toe. I could see the sweat on his forehead, and I'm sure he saw the sweat on mine. And at that time, I began to think that, boy, this is going to another level. And if it didn't stop, I was praying in the back of my mind, Lord, please don't let this get out of hand. Please don't let this go to another level where it becomes physical. And believe it or not, folks, all of a sudden, Mayor Ruan stopped. And he said to me, "No, Mayor, we're not going to get anything accomplished by screaming and yelling at each other. So let us both just calm down." To which I gladly agreed, realizing the Lord had answered my prayer. So we both agreed to step away from the hallways. And keep in mind, we had a lot of people in the hallways, hundreds of people from all over, advocating for and against. So we went downstairs and had a cup of coffee. We began to exchange contact information. And we began communicating with each other, thinking of a way and ways and means to how we can approach this in a different manner. And y'all, the rest is history. That was my experience with Kevin Ruan. That was my experience to understand that we're all in this together. And believe it or not, it's a day that I'll never forget. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. You really painted the picture for us. And so, Mayor Ruan, even though you were described as the Goliath in this situation, it sounds like it was a tough situation to kind of find yourself in. What's your reflection of that day and the beginning of these conversations with Mayor Wilson?
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Mayor Hill, President Hill, for putting this together. I think it's really important that we show that we're able to work with one another and start these dialogues. I believe Mayor Wilson painted the picture fairly well. Unfortunately, when you get in office, no one gives you a rule book, okay? I live in the southwest part of Florida, where we rely on tourism, where we rely on, and we live on an island, so water's a commodity. And again, there was a long history that I inherited. The history was advocate at all costs. And unfortunately, that's something I walked into. But what I did do differently, understanding when we've had adversary situations, mostly in my business life, it's better to take 2 steps back. And I could be more than imposing. My stature's a little bit bigger than most. I'm a little bit wider than most. my tone could be certainly a little bit louder than most. So I can imagine how intimidating I can be. But what I learned a long time ago, and really is from training from Xerox, is take a step back and try to deal with people, try to build a relationship and understand his point of view or their point of view, what you're going through. Because again, I'm here advocating for my community. And there was things that were done up at the lake that were wrong. There were also things that they were going on that we were trying to make improvements to Lake Okeechobee. And we had advocated for a lot of money and funding to make sure that took place. And you're dealing with the bureaucracy with the Army Corps of Engineers, you're dealing with the federal government, and you're trying to deal at the local level, trying to understand the issues. But I do recall it. I think that certainly it is an accurate description of the conversations, because again, neither one of us had an opportunity to know one another. Neither one of us knew anything other than what our community had given us. And our community said, this is the issue. His community clearly said, let's not flood. My community was, how are we going to continue to have an economy when every time? And this was a built up situation when I got into office. There was 3 feet of algae on the beach. Okay, so in 2007, 2013, a lot of releases, continue to have just a regular plague of doing this. And it just didn't seem to me, from our point of view, there was a balance, but putting that aside, we needed to have a conversation. And I'm glad we were able to have that conversation and start to understand, what do they need, what do we need, and how together from the local level can we start to educate people, to have them understand, not only in Tallahassee, but in Washington, why it's important. And I think really the situation, the environment was better that we resolved our issue, because what they were used to is us fighting with one another, because really the devil in the room was the Army Corps of Engineers. And the devil in the room was the federal government, because they didn't do their part. They signed something called CERP back in 2000. And Lake Okeechobee should have been fixed. The dam should have been restored. And if we didn't learn anything from Katrina, I don't know what we were doing. So we were able to at least have that conversation.
So once you did have that conversation, how did you start seeing things differently, Mayor Wayne?
So what I did was really try to understand all the issues associated with pollution, the nitrogen, the phosphate, and understanding that there's many elements. It's just not all Lake Okeechobee. But more importantly, what can I do as someone that advocated, someone that testified before Congress, someone that started to have relationships? What we needed to do is fix Lake Okeechobee. Because once we fixed it, Lake Okeechobee, certainly where the mayor was, Mayor Wilson, his community, South Bay, Belle Glade, all could be protected. They didn't have to worry any longer. Because once we actually funded the necessary restoration, they wouldn't have an issue. And in 2022, it'll be completely funded and restored. So that's the pathway we went on to understand that his community now is protected. And then, like in any relationship, if I help you, you help me. So that was the conversation.
Good. Scott, did you have any reflections on your conversation with the mayors last week?
Yeah, Shawanda, sorry about that, little tech problem. Actually, with both of you, both mayors, when we talked last week, you were quite candid about what you described as stereotypes that each of you brought into that first encounter you had. I wonder, Mayor Wilson, if you talk a little bit about the stereotypes that you brought into this conversation over Lake Okeechobee with your colleague from West Florida. And I'll note here, Rachel, we are having some issues when people mute themselves, they're not able to unmute. So he may need to be unmuted by you.
All right, thank you. Hey, excellent question, Scott. So as you know, you think of Fort Miles, Naples, and Centerville Island. I mean, it's like versus the Glades community. It's like the haves and the have-not. We take a great sense of pride about our belonging on this planet. We take a great sense of pride about being a part of contributing to this country. As you know, industries out here, We provide the sugar, the farming products that people need to have on their dinner tables. And so when we hear things like, well, the easy fix is just to flood out those communities. I mean, 37,000, it's only 37,000 people. So what good with that? I mean, what it matters? 37,000 people, you know, they don't have a strong income base. So what would it matter? Those kind of things really bother you. So we were just making sure that everybody understand that our lives matter as well. No matter what our income base may be, no matter what you think of us, we do matter. And so we looked at it from a perspective that all these folks with all the resources in the world, I mean, all they have to do is make one phone call. So I came in with an attitude that we're not gonna let these people just walk on us. That's just not gonna happen. And I stereotype Mayor Rue, and I really did, because I'm looking at this guy, tall, handsome, good looking, wearing $1,000 suits and all. I said, wait a minute, you know, all the folks that he had around him, I mean, you know, it just not gonna let people just walk on us. We know Palm Beach County is a pretty wealthy county, but in the Glades community, we have our challenges. And so, yes, we had a preconceived notion about, you know, those communities on the West Coast. And I learned from that, don't always judge people from the cover. That's not right. And so I'm just glad that we're having this conversation today.
Mayor Wayne, would you agree that overcoming these stereotypes on both sides was critical to the success of what you achieved?
Yes, I think Sanibel certainly has a perception of being an affluent community, and it is. Never say it's not. But what people fail to realize is we're one of few cities that have below market housing. We're one of few cities that have affordable housing. We're one of few cities that actually have a fruit pantry. So you don't necessarily have those ingredients in a city that is affluent as we are. Okay, so there was a diversification, and there was an issue to understand where not only was Mayor Wilson was coming from, to let him know. The other stereotype that was around there was, again, you look at me, you look at my statute, yes, I wear expensive suits, but one thing that most people didn't realize, and part of the people, I don't believe it was Mayor Wilson, but others said, well, you come from that affluent community, Sanibel. You must get paid an awful lot of money. So we're volunteers. No, you're not. Yeah, we're volunteers. I do this out of the goodness of my heart, and that's why I'm doing this. And maybe that was the tipping point, realizing that we're people, okay? And we're here for all the reasons. And the problem is that we both got fed the stereotype. We didn't necessarily get a playbook. Here's what took place over years, and here's exactly what we walked into.
So you brought your own stereotypes into the conversation dealing with the communities from the Everglades as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you know what we were looking at is they had already put X dollars into the lake, and we weren't doing anything different. And again, you can take things to extreme, and that's what we do as people, unfortunately. And that wasn't our point of view. Flood them out, lives don't matter. We were trying to advocate, you know, that there was restoration taking place. And could we have any type of situation from an engineering point of view, from a science point of view, hold a little bit more to water up the lake and not have the issues we were having. But really what was paramount is realizing who the big person in the room was. And it was the Army Corps of Engineers. Because the more pressure that our cities had with one another, the less pressure they had.
The famous divide and conquer.
Absolutely.
Now, both of you, Mayor Wayne, Mayor Wilson, talked as well about how this experience and what you both learned from this experience, and what hopefully members of the community have learned as well, is kind of a microcosm, laboratory for some of the larger struggles that we're facing across this nation, the confrontations we're seeing between people who perhaps bring their stereotypes to those conversations, and thoughts about a path forward. Let me turn to you first briefly, Mayor Wayne, to talk a little bit about what advice you might share with other officials dealing with these sorts of challenging issues.
I appreciate it, Scott. So if anything I learned in my business life is that, you know, you deal with customers, you deal with people, and realizing they're people. Okay, and trying to understand how do we come up with a solution. And I spent a lot of time understanding the solution. understanding the issues and trying to come up with solutions, and then making this my initiative. When I came in as president of Florida League of Cities, it was my initiative, a bold initiative, because quite frankly, I was taking an initiative that wasn't necessarily popular. But in the same token, I assured everyone, and I asked everyone to give me the benefit of the doubt. I will come up with solutions for all parties. And that's just a politician saying things like that. But you know what? If anything I learned with the league and having been involved in the league is all I had, since I certainly am not doing this for money, was my word. And if my word didn't mean anything, then what good was it? And to me, integrity, honesty, and looking people in the eyes and telling them, trust me, meant a long way. And I give certainly Mayor Wilson the benefit of the doubt and then some, because he took a chance, and we've obviously felt a bond and created a bond amongst one another. You know, we both have an admiration for one another that I don't think our communities would ever have. So the league can continue to show that we can build, and the local level is still a level where we have an opportunity to work through difficulties and show the rest of the world that politics doesn't have to be broken.
Mayor Wilson, you set up this conversation for us this morning. I'm going to give you the last word before we turn to questions and answers. So what counsel do you have for your colleagues in dealing with some of these very difficult issues we're facing as a nation?
Again, Scott, thank you for an excellent question. And let me go back to what Mayor Ruin just indicated. This vicious word we call politics. A lot of people seem to run away from it and always ask all of us, out of all the things that you can be doing, why politics? Politics is the process that determines who get how much. Not who get how much for themselves, but who get how much for enrich the community and the people they represent. Who get how much education, who get how much finance, who get how much health care, and who get how much justice. And yet, there's politics involved in the school system, in the White House, the schoolhouse, even in your house, politics involved. So there's no way to get around it. But what I learned, and I will be clear with this, is that you don't always have to agree with individuals. Just find ways and means to come to a common ground. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. The one thing I like is that thinking outside the box, how I can walk away from a conflict or a matter that we may be having different views about, but how it become a win-win situation for everybody. And one day, Mayor Ruin and the rest of the folks, we came up with SB 10, Senate Bill 10, which was a win-win for everybody. It's not that what we all wanted, but it was something that we all walked away from and say, hey, I can live with that for now. So at the end of the day, y'all, is that learn to work together, understanding that there may be different views. And for any day, President Hill and to our league staff, that we need to make sure the new and up and coming, the young politicians understand that nothing's personal about this. It's all about working for the need of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. Thank you for that. So Scott, before we transition to our next conversation, we have one question from Mayor Peter Simmons in Bonita Springs. He says that Bonita Springs is currently at 55,000 residents, with 25% of the population being Hispanic, Latino, and African American. So they created an outreach committee with 9 members, and they're thriving and very active. He's tried unsuccessfully on a few occasions to get the name of the committee changed to the Diversity Committee, but cannot get the City Council to recognize the importance of the word diversity in the name of this great committee. Do you have any advice for him and for the members?
Mayor Wilson, you want to try that first?
Yes, thank you, thank you. I don't know how long that the mayor's been involved with it, but just because it's not happening the way you want it now, don't give up on that thought, that vision. I've been around since 1999, believe it or not, and there are a lot of issues that I put on the table. May not come across, may not be defined and everybody support it, but I don't give up on it. I keep working on it, and maybe I'll find a different approach on it. This Lake Okeechobee issue, you know, it's not gonna go away. We've been talking about this since the early 1900s, so it's not gonna go away. There's always gonna be different views and thought process on it. So my advice to him is don't give up on it. Maybe find a different approach of how he's gonna address it. Because at the end of the day, you know, we all gotta make sure diversity is a part of our platform.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. Mayor Ruane, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I mean, I agree with Mayor Wilson. I think what you need to do is have determination, and you got to eliminate the word can't in your vocabulary, and you need to continue to try to persevere, push forward. And listen, as both Mayor Wilson and I have determined, we were able to work through an issue that had been divided for 100 years. So I agree with Mayor Wilson. Work together. Just don't continue to just give up. Just because no means no doesn't mean you can't come back and try it a different way and see how you build common ground. I would say to Mayor Simmons, build some common ground and build upon that. Don't try to take the bite all at once. Small bites, move forward, build on your wins, and you'll achieve what you want to.
Thank you, Mayor Ruane, and thank you, Mayor Wilson. It was really amazing being able to hear your exchange and how you worked together in order to do what was best for both of your cities. And I want to thank you for being here and sharing today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Just to add the last comment, if you recall when Mayor Ruane became president of the mayors, his initiative was to come up with a solution for the Lake Okeechobee. Now, all the things he could have done, he took upon that, something that we had competition with. So it says a lot about his character. So thank you again, Mayor Ruane. I want to personally say thank you, and thank you, President Hill, for allowing this conversation.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. It's been an honor.
Okay, Dr. Payne, we're kicking it over to you to set up our next conversation with the mayors.
Thanks, Rhonda. So our second segment brings us two mayors who have a unique set of professional experiences coming to the office of mayor in their cities. From the city of Davenport, we have Mayor R.B. Robinson, and from the city of Haines City, we have Mayor Morris West. And what sets them apart from most folks who serve as mayors in cities across Florida and in fact across the country is both of them had careers in law enforcement, including being the chief of police in a municipality, not necessarily a municipality where they serve as a mayor, prior to becoming mayor. So it's a privilege to have both of you. Mayor Robinson, thank you for joining us this morning.
Pleasure.
Mayor West, thank you for being with us too.
Thanks for having me here this morning.
All right, so I'm going to go back and forth between you on this because of what I hope we can do from this conversation is gain some perspective from your perspective about a very difficult issue for many of our communities right now as we are wrestling with concerns about effective policing, relationships between the community and police, and especially the Black Lives Matter movement, and just a variety of issues that, of course, have been roiling the streets of some of our cities across the country. Let me start a little bit just by giving everyone an opportunity to hear your background. So Mayor Robinson, tell us a little bit, just briefly, about your career in law enforcement.
I started out on the U.S. Army, military police, served 3 years in Panama, came back, worked for 31 years with the city of North Miami, fourth largest city in Dade County, retired with a rank of major, which I understand has been changed to commander now. They can't make up their mind what the rank is down there. I came to Davenport in '92. I served as police chief for 7 years. I left for a brief time, came back, went on the city commission, 7 years on the commission. Like the other two mayors, I served without pay for the first 7 years. I must have ticked someone off. They voted me out. I come back 2 years later, won my seat back, and due to some mayors leaving, I was appointed mayor and then ran 2 years ago, won with a 70% majority, and I'm finishing up my first year as mayor. I'm also a graduate, along with Mayor West of the FBI Police Academy.
Thank you, Mayor Robinson. Mayor West, likewise, could you just a brief summary of your career leading up to being mayor?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you all to the Florida League of Cities and Florida League of Mayors and Mayor Hill
for this dialogue with all the different mayors and Florida League of Cities staff members for today. I'm so elated to be here to share my story and my life story with the League of Mayors. So therefore, I was born and reared here in Haines City, Florida. I left Haines City, Florida and went to great Bethune-Cookman University. Yay, Bethune-Cookman, located in Daytona Beach, Florida. After that, which is very interesting because my brother and I, who's also on our city council, was roommates in college. And we would also lived in the same household. So you think that we would go apart, and we're not twins, but we was roommates in college. And while we were at Bethune-Cookman University, we always wanted to know how can we make a difference back in our hometown. So therefore, I returned back to Haines City, where I joined the Haines City Police Department, believe it or not, as a patrol officer. When I was interviewed by the chief of police at the time, he said, well, one of the questions, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I said, I see myself having your job. And eventually I became the chief of police. I did have his job, but he, of course, he retired and later he served on the commission. But nevertheless, I joined the Haines City Police Department. I spent 22 years there serving from a law enforcement officer, worked through every ranking position until I became the chief of police. And I was actually, believe it or not, the first Afro-American chief in Polk County in the history of Polk County. So you can imagine the diversity and the issues that I had to deal with being the first. Anytime you're the first, you become first. Sometimes the first become the last, and the only other place is out. So I became the first Afro-American chief, made a lot of difference in my community. I'm like Mayor Robinson. I attended the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, spent 3 months training with FBI agents and learned a lot. And so I just came back to Haines City to make a difference. After serving 22 years in law enforcement, I then thought I'll just run against an incumbent who had been serving on the commission and seeking to unseat that incumbent. And I put my name in the hat, and I took 60% of the votes from the incumbent, and he lost his seat, and I became the city council. 2 years later, I was doing such an outstanding job, thanks to the training from Lynn Tiffin, from Florida League of Cities, all the training that I got from her and Scott and Shawanda, from all the classes I've taken. They thought I was progressing very well. They wanted me to become the mayor. And I've been the mayor now for 3 years for the city of Haines City, and that's where I'm currently sitting as the mayor of Haines City.
Thank you for the plug, Mayor. Mayor West, talk to us now about how being mayor is different from being police chief.
Oh, it's a big difference. I can tell you, as the police chief, you know, I had an agency, which is not a real big agency. I had 74 total sworn officers in my city at the time. So and you're dealing with all different types of diversity within your department and within the community. Being the Afro-American chief at the time, you know, I was dealing with my own community. My own community at one point in time, because I put so much pressure to clean up the community from the drug-infected community, and they labeled me as a profile. I mean, said I was prejudiced against my own community. It's kind of tough for me because I had my officers to go in there because I wanted our community to be a safe place to live, work, and raise your kids. So, and then on the other side, there's the white community thought that I was a racist against them because I only cared about the black community. So as a chief, it is very difficult when you got to try to manage between different diversify each group, the white, black, Hispanic, and any other group. Tough situation to deal with. You know, even going through the ranks, and I shared this with you, Scott, last week. You know, I've seen the racial profiling going on, racial profiling from within law enforcement. And I used to tell my officers all the time, just because the color of their skin doesn't mean that they're doing something that you need to profile them. And I was actually profiled as the chief. I was actually had my family was in the car and we were traveling back from a restaurant. Police officers don't know my car. So I was driving through the community just to check on my officers and riding around, and one of the officers followed me a couple of miles. Then eventually he pulled me over. I get out of the car and he said, "Oh, Chief, I didn't know who that was you. If that was you, I wouldn't have stopped you." I'm like, "You shouldn't have just stopped anyone for no excuse anyway." So I said, "Why did you stop me?" He said, "I think you crossed over a center line." That wasn't even a center line in the road. So I've seen that, and I've experienced racial profiling even as the chief of police, which I think that going on for many, many years now. But and as the mayor, now I've changed some things, and I'll share with you that later. But I'll give Mayor Robertson an opportunity to speak. But I'll share with you the things I've done since being the mayor, and from a police chief perspective to the mayor, it's a difference. So I'll yield, and I'll let Mayor Robertson give you some insight.
All right, Mayor Robinson, how about you? How would you describe the difference between being chief and being mayor?
Nowhere near the work, nowhere near the pressure that comes down from the police chief. I think I mentioned before, if not, I will. I had a heck of a lot more authority and decision-making when I was police sergeant than I ever had going up through the ranks. And of course, our city, like Mayor West City, is a city manager's city, and our statutes, we're forbidden to give orders or take charge of anything. We can, use a certain amount of our political clout, you might say, but it's totally different. And it's different as, of course, I'm city manager in several cities, and it's totally different. I think I had more fun if I'd stayed a sergeant.
Mayor West, you've already alluded to this, the work that you're doing, and when we talked last week, I talked to both of you, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of relationships between police and members of the community, and especially right now in the African-American community, which is a longstanding issue. So Mayor West, what steps are you taking right now with the police force in your city?
Well, and thanks for that question. As you can see in our country today, with the Black Lives Matter movement and all the civil unrest going on through different states throughout the United States, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and what I shared with you last week was the fact that the question often asks us, does all lives matter? Of course, all lives matter. But here's the deal: the problem that we have now is what's happening now is Black lives. All lives matter, blue lives, any lives. A life is a life. But the current issue now is dealing with the Black lives. And like we said, if there's a house on fire and one's not, that house has the issue right now. The other house doesn't. So you don't deal with that issue. You deal with the one that's on fire. And now it is the Blacks that's on fire, and the lives of Blacks are being, taken away. And so therefore, I went in as the mayor, and we put in the budget this year to put in body cams. It ain't the body cam that we don't trust our officers. The body cam is for the protection of our officers and our citizens. And those body cams will work this way. As soon as you exit your car, those cameras automatically comes on. As soon as you get back in the car, it goes off. It records everything. And I know there's going to be a lot of lawsuits and things of that nature, but we're going to take a number, get in line. But I'd rather challenge a lawsuit than to have an innocent officer lose his life or innocent citizen lose his life. So we're putting things in place to try to make sure that our officers are well protected, not to spy on them. We trust them. It's just for their protection. That's one of the initiatives that we're doing in this year's budget.
Before I leave that topic, West, what I hear in that, I think police chiefs and others in law enforcement are doing this thinking too, but that role that you have as mayor, where you have to balance the concerns and preoccupations and worries of the people who work for the city. Right now we're talking about police, and the people who are served by the city. So you're talking about the residents. And I like the fact that you're framing the body camera issue as something that serves interest, that it protects officers and it protects residents as well. Can you say a little more about how, this is an example, and of course everyone doesn't have to agree about the use of body cameras, but how you're thinking about it and how you're presenting it to your officers and how you're presenting it to your residents, and how this is actually a way of serving and protecting everyone?
Well, as you can see, like I said, in our country, that there's been, and unfortunately, I would say, City of Haines City, we haven't had any issues when it comes to a racial diversity involving officers and a different race. So what we're presenting, we want to be proactive in our city, not reactive. We don't want to wait till something happened and then say we should have had the cameras. You should have them before. And that's the problem with a lot of municipalities. I think that's what's going on in this world today, that we become more reacted after the fact instead of proactive. So a lot of things that we've changed and I've changed as the mayor, we put together a citizen advisory council where the citizen will go in with law enforcement on any use of force. They were, and we don't use our own agency to investigate our officers involved in excessive or use of force complaint. We use an outside entity because the community itself will automatically assume that an officer that investigating his own within his own agency will be automatically, unfounded or exonerated. So we use an outside source along with some other citizens to look at all the facts that involve in the case. And I think that gives it a better perspective, and the citizens agree with that. One of the last things that, as a mayor, that I see very important, because human diversity, we're making it mandatory that our officers get human diversity training, because they're all different walks of life and we don't understand each other culture. We don't understand the way they think, the way they hang out, what they think. So we're doing human diversity mandatory training to train our officers to make sure they understand each other community and diversify each officer for understanding of different cultures. That's what we're doing now, Scott.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Robinson, thinking about your role as mayor, thinking about our elected officials, our mayors and vice mayors who are on this call, what sorts of things do you think are uniquely both the opportunity and the responsibility, perhaps, of elected municipal officials in helping work on relationships between law enforcement and the community? Mayor Robinson, your mic is muted. Let's see if we can, again, this may be something where Rachel needs to click an unmute for you. Hang on a second, Mayor Robinson, we'll get you. Try muting your own mic. You may get a little announcement to that effect. Still muted. These are the chat. There we are. Thank you, Mayor Robinson.
Again, now basically, I think it's the responsibility of the cities and through the leaderships and to the mayors to make sure that they have the available resources, the available training, and the available needs to our police officers who are in the field. My particular department, we're 15 officers, and we're one of the few accredited police departments, especially for a small department in the state and in the city. So we are getting all training that the state accreditation board feels is necessary for us to work in our communities. Unlike Haines City, our city does not have a large Black population. Like Puerto Rican, yes, but Black, no. Our principal Black area is about 3, at the widest is 3 blocks, and at the longest is 6 blocks. And what is going on there is an aging group of people, and the youth have moved away and not come back like many of us. My daughter moved away to Jacksonville. She won't come home. So we don't have quite the problem that they have there in some of our other cities. However, when I came here, we were known as to go get drugs, go to Davenport. Same way with prostitution. You would see prostitutes walking up and down in front of the police station, which we shared with City Hall, and the actually drive up windows to buy drugs, and and this was in the Black area. The Black citizens were constantly upset that the police weren't doing enough to do that. We had 5 officers at the time, and one was a Black lieutenant. But wrote a grant, partnered with the sheriff department, secured voluntary land for a police station, which the sheriff put there. Hurricane blew it away. But and then we both put assigned an officer to community policing that specific area of where concern was. And the two officers did a great job in cleaning up the area. We did things, if we could get ownership, burn down or destroyed the houses, cleared out vacant lots. We started one of the first things I did, first week in the police department, I held a meeting of the Black leaders community and established a rapport with them, which lasted, still lasts with some of their children. That's how long I've been around. But I think that was important. I still occasionally visit the Black church in our city. But I do think at times city commissioners don't realize the importance, certainly, of training. I had problems getting my officers trained and paid for it. But at this time, we have a very progressive city manager, very progressive police chief. As I said, it's unusual for a small department like ours to be accredited through the state. And as Haines City, we are sending our officers to go through the regular training as far as diversity and so forth.
One of the things that I know for anyone in public office, there's the old expression, perception is reality, right? So it doesn't matter what the facts are, it matters what someone has heard. And I think all of us are conscious of how much more we are probably having to deal with interesting, challenging perceptions because of the expansion of social media and the expansion of use and the creative uses to which social media can put. So I wonder, I'm going to ask each of you to think about this, and I'm going to turn to you first, Mayor Robinson. Maybe you have a specific example you want to talk about, or maybe it's just the general idea. You've undoubtedly dealt with situations where there was a perception of something going on in the city, whether it's when you're police chief or as mayor, that simply wasn't accurate. It certainly wasn't completely accurate. And yet the people who had that perception were absolutely convinced of it. And you could understand why. I mean, they weren't crazy. There was something that had prompted that perception. How do you deal with situations where you know people are seeing things one way, you know there's much more to the story, but it's really hard to break through that perception?
Well, for one thing, when I was working with my community police officers, they made it a habit to make sure that people, if you shine the light on a problem, generally you can see where the truth is, where the truth is not. And also making sure that I always had an open door, and making sure I did not just sit in the office. I would get out every day, ride through all the streets, as my community police officers stop and chat. One of the things I did, again, the high problems that we had coming here was in the Black area, and it was no perception about drugs. It was there. I formed what they call a Mad Dads, Mad Men Against Drugs. And we held regular meetings. We held once a month a march through the drug-infested areas, and kept lines of communications. If, say, Mrs. Stewart, which was one of our leaders, and she should call, Robbie, we got this problem, what happened? It's been my experience in law enforcement that things that I was involved in, once it came back to me through the media or somewhere else, I didn't recognize it. So I thought it was important to keep an open door, not wait, but go. Even now, if there is at the Jamestown Park, if there's a barbecue or fundraiser or whatever, I'm there and stay there. And as well as our police officers and our fire chief to meet the information needs of all the community.
Mayor West, how about you? That same challenge of a situation where there's perception of some kind about what's been going on in the city, and that perception is far from the complete story, but you can understand why people think that that's what's happened? How have you dealt with that? What advice do you have for people about?
And there again, that's an excellent question. I can tell you all that doing with social media now and everyone having phones and cameras, every time a police officer make a stop and get in a confrontation with someone, those cameras go to rolling. And the cameras don't go to rolling to actually what they only see the end results. And sometimes see what occurred prior to the police officer getting into the confrontation with the individuals. Now, what I often used to tell officers and I tell citizens as a police chief and currently as the mayor, we don't hold court in the street. If you feel like our officers are doing something wrong, there's a process. There's a system that we all go through. Come in, you file a complaint. We will do an internal affairs investigation if you think that officer done something wrong. If you receive the citation, if you have gotten arrested, then you take that up in the court system. So I've seen it from both angles, from as the mayor and as a police chief, and folks are always wanted to know the difference. That's why it is important. And we used to have car cameras. Car cameras saved our lives, believe it or not, because the car cameras showed the entire incident. And that goes back to things that's happening in this country now. Let's not judge law enforcement all the time, because soon as we see something that has been on television, we only get bits and pieces of it. And then there we have riots, we have protests, and you find out that sometimes the officers are not always wrong. I'm not saying they're always right, but sometimes they're not always wrong. So let's wait to the conclusion of the investigation before we make judgment. And that's what I tell a lot of our citizens now, and we've done the thing, what we call here in Haines City, we do a citizen academy. With the Citizen Academy, we invite our citizens to learn the city from the inside out. They get an opportunity to spend 8 weeks and they visit every department in the city to learn the operation of the city. They get an opportunity to do a ride along with our law enforcement officers to learn and see the stress that they're dealing with. So a lot of things that we're currently doing now is to try to be proactive. Instead of they'll go back and they'll tell other individuals in the community, hey, the police officer, it doesn't work like y'all think it works. It's a lot of details involved in the city. So we try to educate our community before we judge them. So we want them to understand our operation from the inside out. And we do a lot of citizen academies.
Sounds like information and relationships lie at the heart of solving some of these problems. Shwanda, do you have questions for our panelists here?
Yes, so what is one thing that both of you understand about how local government works now that you didn't necessarily understand as police chiefs? Like if you could go back and talk to yourself as a police chief, what would you tell your old self?
Mayor Robinson, you want to go first?
Well, every step of the ladder as you go up through your career, you think, once I get to the next step, I'll be able to solve the problem. It seems like every step you get higher, there's always somebody there. Police chief, you got to answer that city manager. I've had good, I've had bad. And then once you're in the commission, you have to answer to the public in general. And I really found out it's hard working with 5 to get a consensus at all times, although 90% of our votes are 5-0. And it's a different challenge. I remember a particular class in college where we have different personas for different jobs. Now, my persona as a police sergeant was certainly different from what it was as a lieutenant or a commander or the police chief. And the same way now, my persona has to be different. Political, as they say, or he's just another politician. But it has to be different from what it was as police chief, and meeting demands of not just the criminal element, but all elements of the city. Interesting point. I attended a school function some time ago, last year, and I'm going to this year rewards for school. And what was so cool, that police chief was there, the fire chief was there, but the kids liked the mayor better than they did the other two. And I was the one that they all wanted the pictures with. So maybe there are pluses after all. Thank you.
Quickly, Shawan, to answer that question, the difference between the mayor now and the police chief is that when I was the police chief, in the budget, I wanted the whole pie. But now as the mayor, I realize that I can't get the whole pie, that I have to take that pie and I have to split that pie with other departments in the city, because I thought that the police department was actually your main agency of the main operation of the city, and they needed all the money. But believe it or not, and I learned that the fact that police officers and the police department don't make the money. We spend the most money, but we don't make any money. So, and I realized that, and now I have a better perspective for, other departments within the city as becoming the mayor and as a city council member, that we have to take this pie and we have to split it and keep the city running and keep that budget balance different than when I was a police chief. So, but last thing I like to leave with all the mayors and vice mayors that's on this call is the one thing I can tell you that really can bridge the gap between your city council, your city with your community. And I learned this from the Florida League of Cities. I've done a couple of things. I've had what we call coffee with the mayor. That way individuals can come, they can express all their concerns with the mayor. Then in turn, I take those concerns back to my council members and we'll address each and every one of those concerns. So then we went on, and then I have cookies with the mayors. I even go into an elementary level. I want to hear from an elementary perspective, those kids that's in the 6th grade, so I have cookies with the mayor. And the last thing that we done, and all these came through the Florida League of Cities. The last thing I done, before COVID-19, we were scheduled to do a mock commission meeting with our high school. Let them learn in intergovernment how government works. And that way we cover all perspective. We cover the elementary level, the middle school, high school level, and then coffee with the mayors, we have the adult level. We all learn operation of government. The problem is a lot of them don't understand how government operates. And until we can teach them that and learn, then we'll get less complaints coming to that podium when they understand how government operates. And I've done all those things. So thank you to the Florida League of Cities, and thank you to Mayor Hill and the entire staff for having me on today.
Well, thank you, Mayor West. You really set up the next question, because Mayor Ziad wants to know, how are you engaging your communities now amidst COVID? There were a lot of things that we knew we could do well before, but what are some of the ways that you can engage the community now?
We do a lot of Zoom conferences now. Okay. Same thing. We can do coffee with the mayor. We can do it through Zoom. You can still communicate with me just like we're doing today. So all of those things are happening now. Another thing that we've done, we've partnered with Central Florida Healthcare Center and our local Congressman Darren Soto, and we partner with they're doing COVID testing. The city is a partnership, and we do COVID testing every Thursday to make sure every one of our citizens, and there's no charge, get a COVID test. So we're doing our part, and we want the community to do their part. So that's some of the things that we're doing from a local government perspective. But don't let COVID stop you. We can still communicate, whether it's Zoom, whether it's conference call, whether it's Skype, or however, still stay in constant communication with your city and your citizens. Don't let them think that you're absent and don't care about them. And that's when your problems happen.
I love that, Mayor West. Thank you. Always a pleasure. Mayor Robinson, did you want to add anything to how you can engage the community during COVID?
Well, like Mayor West has said, I also have a monthly meeting with the citizens. Now, when this first started, we did our first several weeks or months on Zoom. It was interesting that we only had 1 or 2 listeners of people tuning in, also on our simulcast, 1 or 2. But what we've done now with our commission meetings is we've split the commissioners up. Some people thought I put a couple of commissioners that talk too much in time out, but no. We just split us up where there's 3 upstairs, 2 downstairs, and we've separated we've taken most of the chairs out and made the separation where people can come to the meetings. Then, of course, like everyone else, at the opening, we have the hand cleanser, and we have a box of masks where, if you desire, you can wear a mask. So we try to keep our commission meetings open where people can and do attend our meetings. we've, again, I did have our meeting with the mayor, and one of our commissioners who has since resigned also had a meeting with the mayor one day a month at our local park for people to come and chat with us.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you so much for sharing.
Cookies, though.
You said a cooking show?
No cookies, no donuts.
Oh, no cookies. Okay. I thought you said you did a municipal cooking show. I was going to say, that's interesting. Okay, Scott, I'm going to kick it over to you to go ahead and introduce our final segment.
All right, well, so I want to thank Mayor Robinson and Mayor West for spending time with us this morning and sharing your experiences. It's valuable to hear from you and some great stories as well. Thank you very much. So our final segment for this morning, Shwanda, and we're going to get a preview of coming attractions at the end of this segment. We'll hear a little bit from Mayor Hill about his thoughts for what the year will be like. But for today, our final segment brings us two mayors who have been engaged in conversations of very important nature, different kinds of conversations. We have the president of the Florida League of Mayors, Mayor Terrell Hill, City of Palatka, and Mayor Matt Cernsey, former president of Florida League of Cities from the City of Hawthorne. Mayor Cernsey, good morning.
Good morning.
Mayor Hill, good morning.
Morning.
All right, Sean, it's all yours.
So Mayor Hill, I want to start by asking you, what inspired Palatka to have community conversations?
I think the biggest thing was immediately following the Charlottesville murders. I was looking at what was going on in Charleston, as well as, Ferguson and Trayvon Martin had already started. And it really came on me that it was time for us to actually start to address the pink elephant that was in the room. And so I went to the county commission and I approached them about having a town hall meeting for the entire county that addressed the issues of race relations in our community. Palatka has an interesting heritage of being a battleground for the Civil War, being a place where Rose Plantation was, which led to the freeing of Exuma in the Bahamas. And it was also a place that had a rich African-American history as well. And so when you couple all those things together, we found ourselves as a community that had really a lot of hurt. And so the town hall meeting was called Addressing Historic Harms in order to promote the future. And we just kind of went from there.
Wow. So Mayor Cernsey, were some of the same things on your mind when you decided to start some of these conversations in your community? What were some of the things that prompted your efforts in Hawthorne?
Well, we actually, for what we've done here recently, was started by a citizen, a local citizen had reached out to me saying, we need to do something. What can we do? And we're a largely faith-based community, and so that really brings all of us together. I think Palatka and Hawthorne are real similar besides the population. Of course, by the state standards, we're both small communities, but Hawthorne's by far a lot smaller. But similar demographics, similar culture, makeup here in the northeastern part of Florida, for those that aren't familiar with us. But we have what we call multi-generational community. And so we've had this discussion for a long time. And most of us here, we're about probably 60% Black, 40% white in the city limits, and probably the exact opposite outside the city limits, but we all consider ourselves Hawthorne. But what binds us together is most of us consider each other family. And regardless of the way that we look or where we come from exactly, we've all grown up together, and me being a former coach at the high school, and then also going to school with a lot of people's parents or kids, that we just have that tie that brings us together. And so one of the residents actually reached out and said, you know what, we need to have a prayer for our community and for our nation to try and heal our community, heal society in general, and show that we're all in this together. And that's where it really got started from. We, of course, because of the pandemic, you couldn't have regular church service inside the church, but we found the resource center, the Hawthorne Area Resource Center, and local church there across the street had been having church services from their porch. And so we just ended up having a church service there, and then sharing that on Facebook. And so the entire time has been about continuing the conversation that we've had before. but also continuing to support each other now.
Did you get support, a lot of support from the community, or was there any pushback that you had to deal with from the community?
I think every community is always going to have some kind of pushback. We didn't have much pushback that was public there. You always have people that are so-called Facebook critics that sit behind a computer screen and like to criticize but have no action or no plan. And I just don't pay those people any mind. I mean, they speak for themselves, and normally, especially now that we've built such a great community because of all of us working together, most of the time, the rest of the community will actually reach out and defend those that are trying to do something positive on Facebook. So that's heartening as well.
That's awesome. Well, Mayor Hill, can you tell us a little bit about how you set up the conversations? What was the process like for the community conversations?
First part was we started out with a town hall meeting, and at that town hall meeting, kind of like Mayor she's talked about, we had about 794 comments on Facebook, and you know, I was everything from the N-word to a race baiter. And at that time, I told someone, I said, well, I'll act as if I don't know what the definition of a race baiter is so that I won't get offended. And, you know, after scanning through the conversations, I saw one person say, well, if we don't have a race issue, then why are these comments up here? And they started screenshotting comments and putting them back up so they'd be memorialized. And what we saw was really an angry group of folks that came in. We had about between 200 to 300 people come to the first meeting. And the room was about as evenly divided as it could be. And many folks came in specifically to talk about the removal of the Confederate monument. And so I opened the meeting up by saying, those who are here to talk only about the removal of the Confederate monument, you're in the wrong meeting. You can leave at this time. We're going to go on a road trip from 1865 to the present, and we're going to work on trying to heal this community. And so that's how we started. And then from there, at the end of that meeting, we began to look at race issue study circles as an opportunity for us to bring people into smaller groups, to have true candid conversations over a 5-week period about everything from redlining to perceptions to privilege to solutions. And what we found is the more we highlighted differences, the more we realized that people were a lot alike.
What results, Mayor Hill, are you seeing from these efforts? Are you seeing a change in the overall tone of conversation in the community, or people taking steps that maybe they hadn't taken before?
I think that the people who've participated in the circles, they've taken the additional steps to try and be stewards within the community as a whole, as the conversations evolve. I think what's happened recently is we've had a bunch of backlash as it related to the actual removal of the Confederate monument. We had an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old lead protest just recently. And on the 25th of August, the county commission, after months of kicking the can down the road, finally decided to vote to move the Confederate monument and put a task force together to determine the location. And so, again, you've got that 20% of the community on both sides of the equation who, regardless of what the solution is, if the solution was for us all to move the monument to heaven, they'd still say that's not a great place to be. It's a gated community. And so we find ourselves really just kind of ignoring that group, because no matter what you do, you're not going to make them happy, and really starting to find common ground, I think, which is the common theme that we've heard from both segments, is finding common ground within the community so that you can move forward.
So Mayor Cersei, I want to bring it back to you. What are your hopes and dreams for Hawthorne? Like, what do you want to see as far as the members of your community coming together and really being one Hawthorne?
Well, and I think we're headed in that direction. And, you know, for all the mayors that are on the call here and anybody in attendance, if you think that there's not a problem in your community, you're wrong. You're missing the point. Having the discussion is the first step to getting to where you need to be. I think that the main part that anybody wants is just that everybody to be treated the same, everybody to have the same opportunities, that no matter what you look like, where you come from, that you have the ability to have just as good of shot at getting to the next level, owning your own business, that you just don't have those barriers. And I think that's where we're all trying to get to. We're having those discussions. We're trying to get economic development. I support any business that's here in town, as long as obviously they're legal businesses. And so I support all of them. And no matter who they are, I try and promote them, and especially making sure they have access to all the resources, all the grant funding, any kind of opportunity zone incentives or anything else to be able to reach out and help people. But also just to be able to let everybody feel like they're a part of the community. We have this thing where we saved our school from being shut down. And I think the biggest part of that was that everybody felt like they had a hand in saving that. And it's not, you know, as mayors, we get too much credit and also too much blame. And I've learned that with all kinds of situations, whether it was coaching, I'd be the best coach in the world, or I was the idiot standing down there on third base trying to send a guy to second base that couldn't run it anyways. But you have to also share, whenever you do get that credit, share it with the community, because you didn't do it yourself. And so that's where we're getting to. We're all in Hawthorne. We're all trying to do better. We're reaching out to our neighboring communities. Mayor Hill and I are working together. We're putting together some big initiatives, just about collaboration and working together.
That's awesome. You said something that was so poignant. Even if you think you aren't having these issues, or that your community isn't dealing with these issues, every community across the country is dealing with these issues. And so that leads me to a question that we received from Mayor Ann Gerwick. She said, do you have suggestions for communities that are already integrated? Like, how can they start the community conversations? Because it's awkward if communities don't think they have a problem. So what are some suggestions for starting these conversations in your community?
First suggestion is, I think the first thing you've got to do is start to ask the question. And so what we found, I'll give you an example here locally. We had a county commissioner. We're about 15% African American in the county, and we're about 53% African American in this city. And what we found is we had a county commissioner who said, I don't believe our county has those problems. I've not heard anything about it. And then he was really living in a bubble. And once he decided to actually reach outside of his circle of friends, he realized that this problem was much greater than what he thought. And so when you start to engage people who aren't in your general circle, then you start to realize that perceptions are there. And I think the first thing you have to do is have that initial uncomfortable conversation with someone who you're not familiar with. And so from there, when you start having the conversation, you begin to gauge, you know, what government's role has been in creating the gaps. And so it may not be necessarily a race riot or war or some incident that creates the gap, but it may be a gap in economics. It may be a gap in education that creates really the thought process that nothing's going to change. And I think the biggest thing we have to make sure we do as elected officials is not accept silence as you don't accept the silence as acceptance. So I tell people all the time that, you know, Black tolerance is not Black acceptance when it comes to some of these issues that we deal with. And I think people get them confused because so many people are afraid to speak out because of backlash, and they'll grin and tell you everything's okay. And behind it all, they're hurting on the inside.
Thank you. Mayor Sternstein, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to add to that is, I think back to whenever I was president of the Florida League of Cities, we had the Florida Regional Compact Initiative, and we heard two mayors earlier talk about this exact issue of how they had a lot of vitriol against each other and basically misconception more than anything. And I have to give a lot of credit to Representative Kristen Jacobs, who passed away this past year, for leading this charge and also building this initiative. And all it was just a matter of communication and learning how to understand each other, learning how to come to consensus, that knowing that we're not all going to agree on everything. I mean, there's no way for us to all agree on everything, because it'd be a boring world anyways if we all thought alike. But we would probably all be out of jobs anyways, because we wouldn't have to make those tough decisions. But we just start from a foundation of where we all can agree upon something. And I still believe that about 80% of issues in this country and in really the world in general, we agree on. It's just between media, and of course everybody likes to blame media, but between media, partisanship, or whatever it may be, that we throw out these buzzwords, and these buzzwords are triggers for emotions. And we have to learn how to leave those out of the dialogue, especially when we talk about sensitive issues. And, you know, we got to a point to where we were doing these all over the state, Florida Regional Compact initiatives in Volusia County, down in South Florida with 161 cities. And to try and get all these people to agree on one thing was hard, but it worked because you just started from a basis of understanding each other. You left out the buzzwords. You gave everybody an opportunity to be a part of it. You also invited other stakeholders and not just elected officials. And I think that's the key, is like Mayor Hill saying, is he brought everybody together. And I think that's our job as leaders, is not so much to have the answers, because none of us have all the answers, but just to be a conduit of bringing the conversation to the table and letting everybody be having a seat at the table and not being on the menu, like we say often.
The other piece is just to make sure that people, we put people in an environment where they can express their opinions and not be subject to backlash. And I think when that's what creates the candidness about it all.
Scott, did you have any questions?
I actually simply wanted to pick up on the thread I was just hearing from both Mayor Hill and Mayor Cerency. And it comes back to something you say all the time in training, Shwanda, that it sounds to me like the kind of bottom line message is we have to start with our assumptions about the people we're dealing with. And Mayor Hill, you were talking about creating the safe space. Mayor Cerency, you were talking about being the conduit. Conduit for what? The space for what? For people who genuinely have the best of intentions, but may simply not understand, don't understand, as we all struggle to understand some aspect of a controversial or sensitive topic. And if we just assume coming in the door, you know, you're here because your intentions are good and my intentions are good, then the door is open for people to be honest, to say difficult things, maybe hurtful things, and not to take that as a personal attack, but as a need to understand. I've been just very struck by what both the mayors had to say.
Yeah, very powerful.
Mayor Cerency, I'm going to be turning to Mayor Hill in just a moment to kind of wrap us up with this. I'm assuming, Shwanda, we don't have any other questions at this point. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So, Mayor Cerency, I'll kind of give you a last opportunity if you want to make a comment about this conversation we've had, and then I'm going to turn to Mayor Hill.
Sure thing, and thank y'all, Scott and Shwanda, for hosting this, and thanks to the Florida League of Mayors and President Hill for your leadership. I think this is an awesome opportunity that all of us have to be able to lead not only our communities, but the state and society in general in a new direction, direction where we all get along. Myself and Mayor Hill, we look a lot different, but we're so much alike. We serve real similar communities, and I'm not as athletic as he is, but I try. And I think we all have some, I guess, traits and strengths within us to be able to put the puzzle together and to heal our nation as we are.
Thank you, Mayor Cerency. Mayor Hill, this is the first of these series of workshops, candid conversations with mayors, where we hope, on the one hand, mayors will have the opportunity to share with each other, and on the other, that they'll be able to learn from each other. So I wonder if you would share with your colleagues a little bit of what you would like to see happen in the course of this year of your presidency of the Florida League of Mayors.
So first of all, I want to thank both you and Shwanda for the great job you've done with this workshop today, and also to all the mayors and everyone who participated, as well as staff in their respective places. I think more than anything else, what we want to see is just what happened today is an opportunity for us all to begin to have the candid conversations about what goes on throughout the state and what government's role has been in issues of poverty and issues of race relations, and actually in implementing herd or divides within communities. And also being able to introspectively look at ways in which we can make all of our communities better. It may not necessarily be a black and white issue. It may be an issue that is a rich and poor class issue or an economic issue that may be within the community as a whole. And what we've got to do is I think we have to really consciously look at impacts every time we make decisions, every time we begin to create standards. And if we as mayors who are on the forefront and we're the faces of all our communities, if we can consciously start to have that conversation about what are the impacts of the actions that the city's about to take for all people from different walks of life. And we begin to do that every time, looking at whether it's the impacts on diversity or the impacts as it relates to race relations or poverty or whatever it may be. If we can start to have those conversations and we can start to go around the state in various communities and continue to have these conversations and work towards solutions, then I think we can create an action plan which will allow us to all have a playbook, kind of like what Mayor Ruane said, which gives us some options as we begin to encounter certain situations. I think oftentimes we have conversations about our successes when we're with the league and we're at conferences, but many times we don't necessarily talk about the struggles that we have within our communities because we don't really want to air dirty laundry or things of that nature. But I think if we band together and we begin to talk about it all, then we'll realize that in many situations, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's just a matter of us being, again, the conduit that engages conversations with our citizenry, with our community as a whole, or even with other governmental agencies in our area, so that we can start to build a better Florida. And, you know, Mary Lawson Brown always kind of coins the phrase that we're better together. And that's what this is all about. It's creating opportunities for the league to be better, for the Florida League of Mayors to be better, and for the state to be better as a whole. And it starts with mayors.
Thank you, Mayor Hill. Let me thank you for the opportunity. I reciprocate your thanks. Sean and I have really appreciated the opportunity to work with you and your colleagues. So Mayor Hill and Mayor Surrency, Mayor Robinson and Mayor West, Mayor Ruane, Mayor Wilson, thank you all for being on the panel this morning. And Mayor Hill, thank you for having the idea and driving this idea forward so we can start to have these conversations. I also want to take a moment to thank members of our league staff who helped make this happen. Our early conversations that Sean and I had with Scott Dudley and Linda Bridges helped us to understand possibilities. And then, of course, the opportunity to talk with you again, Mayor Hill, to have clarity about where you wanted to go with this. And the folks that made this all work, without whom we would not be able to see each other or hear each other, Rachel Hamilton and Nike Cooper, thank you so much for making this all work. This is going to conclude our program, the first of these Candid Conversations with Mayors. And thank you for joining us. To all of you in the audience, we look forward to the next opportunity to come together and have these conversations.